welcome. There we go, former Prime Minister. So thank you so much for joining us today. Malcolm and I know each other well, so it's kind of like having a chat with a friend today. So that's what we're hoping for. I've got a few questions to ask you. You've all got the book, so thank you, Coraggio, for the book. And then hopefully there'll be a bit of time for questions. I know you love questions. So.
I do, yep. Very happy.
Excellent, excellent. So now we do have the book here. So I guess, you know, it came at a time when you'd finished politics and it was probably fairly cathartic, but what do you hope people will take away from the book?
Well, I hope they enjoy it. It's a story. I like telling stories, true stories, I might add. But and I like writing. So I've written a few books. This is the biggest one. Well, look, I hope they'll sort of understand a bit more of what I've done and some of the important episodes in Australian history that I've been involved in and played a central part in. So it's a history book. It's first hand. What's distinct about it is I've always been fastidious about getting the facts straight. We're living in an age where people are actually unhinged from the truth. It's really, this is not just a Twitter issue or Facebook issue. This is the mainstream media. Look at the way, what I'd call the sort of right-wing, populist media like Fox News, spread and reinforced and amplified the lie that Joe Biden had not won the election. Now, you might say, oh, well, so what, argy-bargy, but that had the net result of thousands of people, many of them armed, sacking the Capitol building and, could quite easily have killed, a number of the legislators. In fact, they were marching in with signs saying, hang Mike Pence, who was the Vice President. This is not... So this is not... This sort of untethering from the truth is really dangerous, just perhaps something we can discuss later. Anyway, the only point I'm making is that I've always been anxious about getting the facts straight, probably because I started off as a journalist in the days when there were sub-editors who used to check the facts. That hardly exists anymore. Or indeed as a young barrister, constantly terrified of an grumpy old judge, who might have been as old as 60, for example. Incredible. Incredible that people as old as that are still employed. Jumping on me from a great height. So I've taken care to get the facts straight in the book, and I haven't seen, people saying the facts are wrong, or, this didn't happen, or that didn't happen. So I've been pretty careful about that, very careful about that. So I hope it's obviously a personal story, but I hope it is, to the best of my ability, an accurate one of the events that I've been involved in, and a bit about myself, my family, and so forth. So anyway, there it is. I hope you enjoy it, and it's a good book. It's quite heavy. It's over 1 kilo.
Good for working out.
It's good for working out. A bit of light weights. Yeah. Doesn't have any particular aerodynamic qualities. I wouldn't encourage you to throw it at someone, but if it did connect, they wouldn't appreciate it.
It holds papers down as well, so it is good like that.
Yeah,
but
good
actually,
for zooming.
Oh, I know.
Get a couple. Actually, you should take 6, and you can put your computer screen on it, so you get the camera just the right angle.
I have done that actually. It's actually the perfect size. So, but actually on that, because you talk about the truth, and I'm digressing a little bit. Sorry, Richard. But when you were writing the book, did you think, oh, should I really write that? Was there anything that you thought I don't know? Yeah, no,
I did. I was very careful on some matters that touched on national security. So I was, I didn't say anything that was untrue or inaccurate, but I was more discreet than I normally would be in some areas which involved relations with other countries, because I think that those people are entitled to know what happened, but sometimes you just got to be a little bit careful about that in the in the moment. And yeah, there are a couple of things I left out because I didn't want to unduly offend people. But having said that, you know, if you start pulling your punches, it ends up being gutted. You know.
Yeah.
I mean, this is what I said to Christopher Pyne. I mean, Christopher's a really good friend of mine, but Christopher's book, which is interesting. I encourage you to read it. But you know, he was very un-Christopher-like. You know?
Oh, okay, yes.
You know, so it was sort of Christopher. It wasn't Christopher normally, which is unplugged.
So he held back, did he?
Yeah, I think so. I think so, and I think I think you're better off telling things as they happened. You know?
Yeah, no. Well, he's also so colourful when he does actually tell it how it is. So yeah. So now
he is so funny. He's so funny. I'll tell you a Christopher's story, which will amuse you. So you remember that time when Scott Morrison appeared in the House of Representatives with a lump of coal? You know, which I had no idea this was going to happen. I sort of started waving this lump of coal around. I thought, oh my God, you know, I often used to reflect on the fact that I was, you know, living in a lunatic asylum. That was one of those moments when you think it's just, this is beyond parody. But anyway, afterwards, we was a cabinet meeting and Christopher took Scott on, and it was so funny. It was so funny. He said, Scott, you may think everybody likes coal, but they don't. Not at all. In my electorate, they hate it. They absolutely hate it. And of course, Julie Bishop and I, who know Christopher very well, and Julie comes from Adelaide, proceeded to then wind Christopher up.
Oh no.
Because there's a very sort of posh area in his electorate in Adelaide called Burnside.
Yep.
I don't know if any of you know that. Sort of a bit like Double Bay, I suppose.
Yep.
And so Jules says, Christopher, and how do they feel about it in Burnside? He said, Burnside, that's where they hate coal the most. But it was, you know, it was good. He's a really, I think he's a loss to the Parliament in many ways, not least because he had a sense of humour, which so few of them do, right?
He is a lot of fun. Now, actually on the back of this book, which I find a really interesting comment, our nation, our Australian project is a remarkable one, but we cannot take its endurance or success for granted. So do you think Australians are tending to take things for granted? I mean, look at where we are in the world landscape now. The economy seems to be booming. Everything seems to be going well. We've got COVID under control. Do you think we're sitting back and are we in for a bit of a shock ahead?
Well, we will be if we're overly complacent. You know, you've got to, whether you're in business or in government, you've got to be constantly asking yourself, can I do things better next week than I did this week? You know, the minute you start saying we've always done it this way, or you know, not invented here, when someone comes up with a new idea, I mean that is, you know, that's takes you into disaster, right? So you've got to be, you know, I'm not saying you've got to be a neurotic, nervous wreck, you know, worried that everything's going to go to blazes in a heartbeat. But you've just got to be constantly saying, you've got to be innovative, you know. And that's what it's about, really, just always being prepared to look at how to do things better. Now, as far as we're concerned, I mean, we've got some really big advantages, natural advantages, but our biggest asset is ourselves. Our biggest asset is not a rock under the ground, it is Australian people walking around on top of it. And one of our biggest, among that, part of that is our success as a multicultural society. Now, you know, Australians are great knockers of themselves. I mean, no one will run Australia down more readily than an Australian. Now there's some good sides to that, but if you don't recognise the value of what you've got, you may end up taking it for granted. Now, you know, so in this city of Sydney, about a third of the people in this city were not born in Australia. Nationally, the figure's about 30%. Over half of Australians have got at least one parent born overseas. So, and we're very diverse. You know, there is no other developed country, comparable country, with such a diverse community as we have. And yet, by and large, we get along pretty well. And so you've got to be really vigilant about that, and particularly have zero tolerance for people, whether they're in politics or the media or somewhere else, who try to stir up hatred and animosity, you know. So that is, you know, that's, you know, I used to give regular homilies on this subject when I was Prime Minister, but it can't be said often enough, because, you know, you don't have to look around the world very far to see what happens when people are turned against each other. I mean, look at the United States. I mean, man, that place is more divided now, I think, than it's ever been, you know, other than perhaps the Civil War, you know, which was, what, 170 years ago or something, it must be now. But the, so that's, I think the complacency is the prelude to decline. So you can't do, you've just got to be constantly alert.
Thank you. Now, you had a really successful career pre-politics, and I know you probably get asked this a lot. Why on earth did you decide to go into politics?
Oh, the Streakers Defence. You know what that is, don't you?
No.
Oh, okay.
Streakers Defence.
Streakers Defence. Okay, so
I've never heard of that.
So the guy, that generally is a guy, has too much beer in the sun at the cricket, takes all his clothes off and decides to run across the field. He's consequently arrested, hauled before the magistrate the next morning, and the magistrate says, "What on earth? Why did you do that?" And he says, "It seemed like a good idea at the time." So that is
You heard it here, everyone, at Coraggio.
That's the Streakers Defence. No, look, no, I've always been a very strong believer in and practitioner of active citizenship, public service. You know, I think, you know, and so are you, Susan, as the Mayor of Woollahra. I mean, you know, you can stand around and say, "Oh, the government, they're all a bunch of mugs, and you know, the council are hopeless," and everything. And then, well, why don't you have a go and see if you can do a better job at it? And so I've always had an interest in that, and that's why I got involved. And I mean, it was, for me, and Lucy, it was good timing in this sense, that I went into Parliament when I was 50, and we got married when we were young, so our kids were both grown up. You know, in fact, one of them wasn't even living in Australia anymore, so it was much more manageable, because I mean, whatever people may say, you know, the whole Canberra political thing is very tough on families, because, you know, you're away, well, you're away for at least half the year, basically. So that was good. So the timing was good, and I thought I could make a difference, and I did. So that was good. Would have liked to have done it for a bit longer, but you can't do these things. Very rarely you can do the best jobs for as long as you'd like.
Yep, so Streaker Defence, I'm going to remember that one now. But actually, you just touched on what it's like in Canberra. And, you know, you talk about the bonk ban that you introduced, which kind of sound like, people laughed at that at the time. And now it's like, that was a really smart thing. But, you know, I don't think people actually understand, one, what it's like to be in politics, and two, what really does go on in Canberra. Because it's not all, you know, you work really hard. And it's a big sacrifice to, as you say, families, and you have really no life to yourself. So can you give us a bit of an insight? Well, one, into the bonk ban, and then also really what does go on in Canberra.
Well,
maybe they're interrelated.
Okay, so the culture, the workplace culture, and in particular, attitudes towards women in Canberra are absolutely Neanderthal. I mean, you know, I saw Scott Morrison said the other day, "Oh, you know, other workplaces are like this too." That is just complete, I mean, as you all know, it's just not true. It's just completely untrue. It reminds me, when I got there, it reminded me of the sort of media business in the 1970s. You know, it was literally completely anachronistic. It staggered me. And the, you know, again, you've heard, I mean, there's been so much about this, I won't labour the point, but one of the things that became increasingly obvious to me was that far too many, I would say the majority of the ministers and members, thought it was actually okay for them, the boss, to be sleeping with generally younger people, generally women, who were working for them and working directly for them and in a position where they could literally be fired, you know, like that. You know, there's under the MOPS Act, you know, there's, it's employment is completely discretionary. I mean, the problems it created, just from a workplace relations point of view, you know, leaving us, putting all issues of morality and consistency and having people standing up in the parliament and saying, you know, gay marriage is the worst thing in the world and we must defend the traditional marriage and the traditional family. And, you know, generally they were also defending traditional adultery at the same time as they were defending traditional marriage. Like, it was literally, all of that hypocrisy is one thing, but it's really disruptive in workplaces. And it became obvious to me that they all thought I was, my colleagues thought I was this sanctimonious old bastard who was completely out of touch, you know. And so I just said, look, okay, this is what I'm going to do. And to give ScoMo credit and Christopher, as it happens, they both supported me, but it was my call because the Ministerial Code of Conduct is the Prime Minister's code. So he or she doesn't have to consult with anyone. That's it. So I just said, right, I'm going to make a change here. And what that means is that if this stuff goes on any further, you'll lose your job, right? And it's black and white. So, but it was honestly, to I think most people in the corporate sector, they looked at that and said, why would you need to do that? Well, the answer is, as is now very apparent, I did. But it's just, it's really pernicious. And I mean, there's so much has come out recently, but you can see there's something profoundly wrong in the attitudes there. And I think part of the problem, I mean, there's a lot of problems associated with, one of the problems is that so many of the people in politics have never done anything else. You know, so if you get in, you know, you get in there as a young staffer or whatever, and, you know, you bang, 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 you go up all the way up the top, and you don't know, you actually don't know what the real world is like, you know. And I think, you know, both sides have got this problem, by the way, but the Labor Party used to be more diverse. Like when I was a young journalist in the state parliament in the 70s, the Labor members were all trade unionists, but they had actually guys, and they were almost all men, who had worked. You know, they had laid bricks, you know, like Jack Ferguson, you know, who was, you know, Neville's Rand's deputy, you know, or driven trains or trams or whatever. Now they're all university-educated apparatchiks who actually, for whom I used to taunt them. I always used to say, you blokes, as far as you're concerned, manual labour's a Mexican bandit. They had literally no idea, right? And on our side, the Liberal and National side, again, it's becoming very, very similar. I mean, and I mean the National Party, good heavens. I mean, the days when it represented farmers are so long past. I mean, Barnaby Joyce actually one night in the House, to his credit, a moment of candour, said to the Speaker, apropos of nothing, I was there, and he said, oh, you know, the member for Wentworth, I can't remember what job I had at the time, and his member Wentworth's here, he's got more cattle than the entire National Party room put together, and I don't own a lot of cattle. So, you know, so it's this sort of professionalisation of politics, I think, creates some real problems.
Is there anything you miss about it?
Well, look, the only thing I miss, honestly, is the ability to do useful, good, valuable things, right? Yeah. The game of politics, which some people love, like Christopher loved all that, all the skullduggery and plotting and scheming, you know, he loved all that. and always up to mischief.
Yes.
I couldn't stand it, right? That was an environment you had to operate in. But so for me, politics without, or power without a purpose is pointless. But a lot of people love politics for the game, and a lot of people are attracted to power because they want power for its own sake.
Yeah.
Now a lot of people in business find that hard to understand, and it took me a while to really understand it myself. For many people in politics and in the media particularly, to say to them, why do you want to have power, is like saying to you, why do you want to have sex? Well, it feels good. I love it. It's, I like sex. It's a natural. It's something you're attracted to. That's how a lot of people feel about power, and it's very. So the problem is that you can get leaders and governments whose only mission is to stay in power, but without actually much commitment to doing anything with it. Now, to me, that would be literally the worst of all worlds. What would be for me? I'd say like that. My brain says does not compute in response to that, but I tell you, it's actually very common, and it's something you have to be very alert to.
And then just sort of last touching on politics. So looking back at your time, what is something that, what is your proudest moment?
I'm not.
Hard question.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. A really good question. I think in terms of, every government does things that any government would have done more or less given the circumstances, and sometimes people get credit for doing things that anybody would have done now because the times demanded it. And there are things that you do that are routine, building a road, building a hospital, fixing up a school. These are really important things, and it's really, really important that they're executed well, but they're not where you've actually made a change. So actually look at this. I think it's in the conclusion of my book. You can form your own view on it. What are the things that I was able to do that I don't think would have happened had I not been there? Well, the Trans-Pacific Partnership absolutely would have been as dead as a dodo had I not persisted against everyone's predictions and got it done with Arbe and so forth. Snowy Hydro 2.0 would never have happened other than without my input. Same-sex marriage, well, I'd like to believe it would have happened by now, if regardless of my involvement, but it certainly wouldn't have happened under a Liberal government. That is for sure. Both my predecessor and my successor were ferociously opposed to it. So getting that done, that was probably the biggest social reform in my time. There are some of the things. There's a lot of others, but it is the emphasis on innovation, the amazing uplift in the tech sector here. You've got I'm sure many of you are involved in this, but the amount of capital, the amount of innovation, the amount of energy that's in our tech sector now, there's definitely a link between that and the big boost I gave it in the National Innovation and Science Agenda. And not just the money, but actually talking about it and boosting it, and actually saying this is good, these are the jobs of the future and all that. The problem is, politicians, by the way, particularly me in my case, I used to get very conscious that I was saying the same thing again and again, right? But the reality is that nobody, apart perhaps from your nearest and dearest, and not even them, nobody is actually listening to everything you say all the time, right? So that's where another old political saying, the vomit principle, which I'm sure you're aware of, which is they say that at the point in a campaign where you feel that if you say something again, you will literally throw up. At that point, you may just be cutting through people. But I think talking constantly about innovation and tech and so forth, I think was very helpful. So those are some of the things I'm proud of. But the question is, did you make a difference? I think I did.
Yeah, excellent. And actually, I did have to ask one more thing, because I know everyone asked you this. There is a chapter in the book, Donald Trump.
Oh yes.
What was it like meeting Donald Trump?
Well, the problem it was incredible, but the problem was the first real encounter I had with him was on the phone, and it was just he just went off, so it was sort of. I'll tell you this.
Were you holding the phone out like this? Or?
I was on a speakerphone, definitely. Well, there was a guy called David Bold, who you would have met. He's worked for me for years, and Boldy was sitting on the other side of the desk, and the conversation was getting so willing. Trump was so angry. I was obviously kind of looking at the phone, and I just looked over to see David, and he was literally the colour. He was just as white as a sheet. And he was sitting there like this, thinking, "Oh my God, President of the United States is screaming at Malcolm. What's going to happen?" And so I thought, well, I'm not going to get any help from you, so I just looked out. But okay, so this was the story. It's very interesting, and it gives you an idea of the difficulties of dealing with Trump. So I was very concerned to get the asylum seekers off Nauru and Manus, but we were very, we were of the view, based on experience, people can question that, but that was our view, that if we brought them back to Australia, the boats would just start up again, because the people smugglers are in business. It's like a travel business, except it's illegal and much better margins. They kill people a lot. They're crooks, right? And so they would then market that. So that was our view. That was not a ideological or political view. That was a hard-headed view based on experience and intelligence. So however, we'd concluded that if we could get them resettled somewhere else, then the people smugglers would not be able to say, "You'll get to Australia." And I did a deal with Obama whereby they would take, like it was agreed, the number was 1,250, but if Barack had still been there, it would have been a lot more than that. And we did some favours for them in return, some of which have been written about, which I left out of the book. But anyway, bottom line is, I'm a businessman. Okay, so the idea that the Americans did it for us for nothing, but shows a certain naivety. Anyway, so we got that deal done, but then, against all expectations, Trump wins the election, and so the question is, will he stick to the deal? Now we really put the weights on the Americans to stick to the deal, and they told us they would. Again, it's more about this in the book, but Pence rang Julie and said, "It's okay, it's all done." Mike Flynn, who was then the National Security Advisor, rang Justin Bassey, who was his counterpart in my office. It was all done. And then, so that was all good. But then, literally within a few hours, an hour before the meeting with Trump, the call with Trump, each of those people ring back their counterparts and say, "The president's not going to do it, don't even raise it, it's off, the deal's off," right? So, I obviously did raise it. He was angry that I raised it, and he basically started off at saying, "No way, Jose, no," and ended up with, "Yes, but I'm really angry with you." Yes, through gritted teeth. So my job was to get him from no to yes, and I figured it probably wasn't going to be an easy ride, but I did. Okay, so what are the takeaways from that? And again, I've dealt with grumpy billionaires a lot in my life.
So have I.
They
They all live in Mallara.
The bullies if you give in to a bully, you just get more bullying. So that is, and so sucking up to bullies I mean, there's no point being gratuitously rude and picking fights. But equally, if you roll over, they'll just want you to roll over again and again and again. I always just compare it to the shopping scene in Pretty Woman. You know that, where Richard Gere is Julia Roberts, wasn't it?
Yeah, Julia Roberts.
Julia Roberts, and the obsequious shop assistant says, would you like some more grovelling? And he said, yes, very good, some more grovelling. He didn't care. His margin was probably 90% on the stuff he was selling. So basically, the good thing about that was it established a level of respect. I mean, I'd never done business with Trump, but we had a lot of people in common, friends in common, he knew what I was like, and obviously knew what I was like from the call, and that enabled me to get a lot of good things done with him. I mean, I managed to persuade him not to impose steel or aluminium tariffs on us, or quotas for that matter. And again, there's quite a bit about that in the book, which you might find interesting, just to how that negotiation worked. But what was weird about the Trump administration was there was only one decision maker. So normally in a government, like in a big company or anywhere, there are people you talk to, you talk to the, this minister, that advisor, that official, and it kind of, percolates up. In Trump's administration, you could have all of the advice saying, go left, and Trump would read none of it. Someone would give him a 10-minute précis of it, and he'd say, oh no, we'll go right. and it was so funny. I mean, he had this sort of thing. He'd known Kerry Packer quite well, because I guess Kerry gambled in his casinos and played golf with him and all that stuff. And he had this thing about me and Packer. And literally every time I met him, we had a sort of a route. It was like literally same way every time. He'd say to whoever we were with, Emmanuel Macron or whoever it was, he'd say, Emmanuel, do you know Malcolm is the best lawyer in the world, the best. He kept my friend Kerry Packer out of jail. Isn't that amazing? And I would say, well, I'd always say the same thing. I'd say, well, thanks, Donald, very kind, but it wasn't that hard because he was innocent. Oh, no. Emmanuel, no. Kerry was so guilty. and literally, which, by the way, he wasn't. But anyway, it didn't matter because it was showbiz, right? It was absolutely showbiz. Then there was this scene again, which is in the book, in a skiff. Now, do you know what a skiff is? Yeah, a skiff was a sailing boat, right? No, a skiff is a secure information facility, communication facility, and it's essentially a container. Basically, looks like a container, which the Americans lug around wherever the president is. They use in a lot of we have them in embassies and stuff. And the idea is that you get in there and close the door and no one can hear you. So at Hamburg, Trump, I really needed to nail Trump down on this steel stuff, right? Because it would have killed our, 25% tariff would have killed our exports to the US, done enormous damage to BlueScope. And anyway, so I was fighting very hard for that. And so for a whole bunch of reasons, we ended up in there with, again, with Macron, with Theresa May and a couple of other leaders, various senior people. And so Donald did not want to talk about steel, so he wanted to talk about anything else. So he then got onto the refugee deal, which by this stage he was no longer angry about. And so Macron was the one that was getting all this. And I mean, Emmanuel Macron is a wonderful guy, but he had never met anyone like Trump before. He was speechless. And he said, Emmanuel, do you know Malcolm has 2,000 of the worst terrorists in the world, the worst, locked up on a desert island. You know that? Manuel goes. And do you know what's worse? That fool Obama agreed to take them. Can you believe that? Worst president ever. The worst. Manuel's going, how do I get out of here? And he said, and you know what's worse, Emmanuel? No, I've got to take them. I mean, do you want them? Would you take them? And he turns to me, he said, why do I have to take them? Do I still have to take them? I said, Donald, they're yours. They're lovely people. You'll get on great, you know. But it was honestly, I'm not, again, this is not even, I'm probably not doing him justice. It was so wild. And then I'd given a speech at the Press Gallery Ball in Canberra, which is supposed to be off the record,
yes.
know, right?
Oh.
And I'd given a speech. I wasn't impersonating Trump, but it was it had a Trumpy kind of side to it. And a lot of people thought I was impersonating Trump, which I suppose I wasn't. I, talked about how we were, I said, Donald and I were doing really well. I said, we're going great, we're going great in the polls. Not the fake polls. They're the ones we're not going great in. Anyway, it was that sort of, it was a laugh, right? Anyway, some disgraceful person recorded it on a smartphone and posted it on the internet, which went sort of viral in America, so I was a bit anxious about how Trump would react. And so not long after that, we caught up with each other and he said, so Malcolm, I hear you've been having some fun at my expense. I said, oh, only very affectionately, Donald. He said, yeah. They say you're better than Alec Baldwin. So the bottom line is, with a guy like that, you just have to keep smiling, but don't take a backward step. And it actually did. I mean, look, he was a terrible president. He did enormous damage to America, and in so many ways. But I think I was able to manage that relationship in a way that at least as between Australia and America, we were emerged unscathed, which you could not say for a lot of other American allies.
Well, you will not read that impersonation, or that impersonation when you read that book. That was fabulous.
Yeah.
I absolutely loved it. Well, thank you for that. So now we've got a whole lot of business owners here, business leaders. So really want to tap into your mind, some insights. So what advice would you give yourself, what business advice would you give yourself if you were going back in time 10 years? Apart from don't get into politics.
No, I would... to be honest, I wish I'd bought more real estate. I mean, I had a kind of a near disaster experience in the late 80s when interest rates were 21% and we owned a commercial property where all the tenants were bankrupt, and the recession we had to have. And I sort of decided that I wasn't really good at leveraged investments. And so I basically made my fortune, or Lucy and I made our fortune, really by turning an unlevered dollar into 10, or more or less, as opposed to, buying something for $10 with $9 of debt and selling it for $11.50, But with the benign interest rate environment, I guess, as you probably worked out, you asked me questions, I'll give you an answer. So this is what Sally always used to say to me, we've got to stop answering the question. So I think I think that from a business point of view, that's probably an opportunity missed. But I think no, look, I wouldn't sort of litigate decisions I've made. I mean, I got out of. If I hadn't gone into politics, I would have. I was planning to and had planned to sort of expand our private equity business. So I think I would have ended. If I hadn't gone off to Goldman and then into politics, I would have ended up with a big or perhaps catastrophically small, private equity fund or venture capital fund, because that's what I like doing. I like getting involved with businesses when they're young or new and adding value. So I don't, you know, I've obviously got a lot of passive investments, as everyone with a portfolio has, but I really like getting involved in things where I can add some value. You know, I don't want to. I never tell people how to manage their businesses as an investor. I've learnt that, but I do like to be able to add value. So I'm an activist.
Thank you. I love that you answer my questions. My daughter, she asked me a question and I give her an answer, and she's offended that I give her an answer. Yeah. So
It's like one of all the most mistakes I've ever made socially was, I won't say who this person is, but this person said to me years and years ago, Malcolm, I just can't help thinking you disapprove of me. Why is that? I said, oh, look, don't worry about it. You know, no, you've got to tell me.
Oh no.
And I did. Now
Oh,
that was a terrible mistake.
That's like someone, this is my bum look big in this.
Yeah. Well, the answer to that,
Yes.
certainly if it's your wife or husband that's asking you that, the answer is always no.
Yeah. Yes, we've learned that too. Okay, so now that's the advice you'd give yourself, but what's a piece of advice that someone's given you that's stuck by you?
Cash flow. Kerry Packer was funny on cash flow. We were having a meeting with the auditors once, and they were talking about cash flow, and Kerry was just getting impatient. He said, look, can I get this right? What cash flow, positive cash flow, means that at the end of the day, I can put a pile of cash in a sack and take it home. Is that right? And the accountants went, yep, that's more or less, that's right. And so that was kind of, I think the thing I took out of that was that you've just got to, you know, accounting profit is very important, you know, for a whole range of reasons. But ultimately, it's whether you've got the cash to pay the wages, then your rent and so forth, that will determine whether you're viable. So it is, sometimes people get deluded about that, and of course think they can fund their businesses perpetually with refinancing and so forth. And in a hot market environment like this, you can get away with that for a while, but there is no substitute for actually being able to pay the bills.
I promised my cab I did not set him up for that answer. We've been talking cash flow all morning, so thank you for that answer. That was wonderful. So now tell me, has there ever been a time you wanted to give up, and then what encouraged you to move forward?
Well, I had, again, I've written about this, it's a pretty painful part of the book. I got very depressed in 2010, and it snuck up on me. And I was, you know, I mean, I don't know how close I came to killing myself, but I certainly was thinking about it a lot, and it frightened the hell out of me. So that was a sort of a lesson in depression, and what you've got to do to avoid it, and if you feel it coming on, to manage it, because it's like I think with depression, it's a bit like the frog in the saucepan metaphor. You know, if you don't you've got to recognise you've got a vulnerability, and I think, like, if you haven't thought about it, just assume you have, because virtually everyone does. If you've got that vulnerability and you feel that your mood is starting to change, you can do something about it. And, you know, that might be just as simple as getting out in the sunshine, by the way. I mean, we are just, we're very sophisticated machines, but there is no doubt that, sunshine, light, is very valuable. Exercise, and just being, sort of grappling with it yourself. I mean, everyone understands how to do everyone should understand more about how to manage their mental health. See, here's the thing. We should be as alert to our mental health as we are to our physical health. So, you know, but I think because it's been a kind of a taboo subject, we haven't been. And so it was very, you know, look, a lot of people said that's the best chapter in the book. But there's also some very contemporary reflections of mine about it, which I think are quite interesting, looking back.
Did you find that hard to write about, or was that sort of fairly cathartic?
Yeah, it was hard. Well, writing books, writing a story, there is an element of catharsis there, no doubt about that, but it can be quite hard. I mean, a book, I've written 4 books, and that's by far the fattest of them, but with each one, when I got about halfway through, I thought, oh my God, am I ever going to finish this? This is such a slog. So, you know, I think Stephen King, the novelist, said the most important thing for a writer to have is butt glue, by which he means you've just got to, presumably doesn't have a standing desk, obviously, but it just means you've got to sit there and do it and write, you know.
Yeah. Which leads into my next question, actually, of habits. So, what habits do you think have served you well?
Well, getting lots of sleep, I think, has always been good. I've always tried to make sure that I sleep. I think that's important. And my my pudginess present notwithstanding, I do, you know, exercise regularly, which is important. So, I think they're very important. And I just in terms of personal relationships, obviously, Lucy and I have been together for, we've been married for 41 years, we've been together for, say, 43 years, which is a big chunk of our lives, particularly hers. But one of the things we always did was invest in time with each other. And I think that's a very important thing. It's very easy, particularly when you've got parents, working hard, kids. It's really very easy between work and chasing around with children for the time between the parents to get squeezed out. And I think investing time in your relationship, in our relationship, which Luce and I were very conscious of, by the way. This is most of the good things that have happened to us have been largely good fortune, but on that score, because both our parents had been divorced, sets of parents had been divorced, we both sort of were very conscious of making sure we put the time in so that we stayed good friends. Because, the reality is it's very hard to maintain a friendship with anyone if you never talk to them. Okay. So it's the same in a marriage.
And it is true. I know you and Lucy well, and it is, you have this enviable relationship, but, you do work hard at it as well. So I think that's a really good message, but it is what you see. It's very special. So just on a sort of, do you think there's a specific character trait that really cultivates success? So do you meet someone and think, they've got it?
Look, I think there's no question about determination. There's no substitute for hard work. I think you've got to be. There's a couple of things. You've got to be obviously determined and keep at it. Don't be easily put off. You've also got to not have the type of mindset where you feel crippled or humiliated by rejection. It's just, those saying, you don't get if you don't ask. Honestly, you just have to keep going. Now, obviously, if whatever you're selling happens to be rejected by everybody you talk to, maybe you better do a bit of product refinement or something like that. But I'm not suggesting you hit your head against a brick wall. But some people are just so frightened of that. Like some people in business. I had a business colleague once who was pretty good, but he could not close because he was worried. I could tell. He had enough empathy to understand he was worried they'd say no. And so even if I would always, I closed every deal. Because he just didn't have the confidence to say, okay, that's great, we've had a good talk, you know, how does 100 sound? No, I want 150, all right, what about 120? Oh, what about 122 and a half? Okay, done, 122 and a half. You know, like, I mean, it's not that hard, but you just have to have the confidence to do that. And so I think that's important. I think what I was talking about earlier, you know, an innovative mindset is really important. You just got to be prepared to be open to new ideas. I mean, Julie Bishop, who is a great friend and also a very keen judge of character, she always says that the reason I've always been so keen on innovation is because I get bored quickly. She's sort of a slight gentle backhander there, she worked out. Brackets, doesn't pay enough attention, you know, dozes off. Attention deficit disorder, you know, yeah, of course. But there's an element of truth in that. So I think that's important because complacency is really very beguiling. Okay, I'll give you an example of this, which is one I think you'll all relate to. So by the mid-90s, it was absolutely obvious that the internet was going to transform advertising. And it was obvious that classified advertising was going to be the first to go. Because, you know, if you could just go online, even with the rubbish speeds we had in those days, and, you know, type, you know, houses for sale in Baulkham Hills, and, you know, they're all on one, you know, I mean, it's obvious that's better than wading through pages and pages of the Sydney Morning Herald. So that was obviously happening. But here's the thing. Newspaper classified revenues did not stop growing until they peaked in about 2006. So you know, these are all legendary business stories now. Management in various big newspaper companies said, oh, everything's fine. This is all doomsayers. We don't need to worry about it. And they were the frog in the saucepan. And it was lovely and warm. And then suddenly they were boiled alive. And, you know, all of those businesses like REA and car sales stock, you know, any of those online classified businesses, they should all have completely belonged to the newspapers that dominated the classified sectors. Now, News Corp bought back into REA, so they kind of played catch up there. The Herald, Fairfax obviously had Domain. But again, you know, a company like Seek, that, you know, the Bassetts, they built that business basically on the complacency of the established incumbents. So because they didn't seem to have a problem. But, you know, the trend, you've got to have that ability to look in a hard-headed way at the trend and say, yeah, this is inescapable, but that doesn't mean it's going to happen tomorrow.
Now, I'm conscious of time and some questions, but just last question for you. What do you want to be remembered for?
I want to be remembered as a very devoted and timely ratepayer of Wallara. I
want that too.
I don't know. I mean,
do we get it on film, by the way?
An Australian, yes, a message to.
It's all right when you sell your house. It's part of that anyway. So we can't reclaim
that's
that.
right. That's right. No, look, I mean, for you know, I hopefully. Well, look, you're remembered for what you are. I don't have any particular summary of that. You know, I mean, it's corny to say this, but it's true nonetheless. I mean, the most important things you do in life are not the business achievements or political achievements. It's your family and the people that you love and who love you. So, you know, I think, you know, that's the, as they say, no one says in their last moments, I wish I'd spent more time at the office. You know.
That's very true. Now, questions? We got some questions, Richard?
Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Malcolm Turnbull.
Thank you.
I think we've got time for maybe one, maybe two questions. Ready? We've got John.
Where's John?
Oh, here.
Oh, there you are. Hi.
I had the opportunity last Tuesday night to ask this of an economist.
Yeah.
So now I have the opportunity to ask an astute business person, as well as the former Prime Minister. We've gone through COVID, and we've seen the government pump millions and millions of dollars into the economy. And the economist explained it to us that it was almost a neutral equation from the Treasury to the government and so on. There was a question asked as to whether it was potential that that debt would be forgiven in part or in whole, insofar as just let it fade into the distance. And the economist tended to say that that was a possibility. So I'd like probably your commentary on that.
Yeah.
And the second part of it was, if it doesn't go and the future generations are left with this debt, do you see that the current reduction in taxes for individuals and corporates remaining or potentially being clawed back? I know it's a
Yeah. No. It's a very good question. Look, I'd say this. Will taxes be higher in the future? I think they're more likely to be higher, to be honest. I think because of the very, the issues that you raised. But I just say this about government debt. The most important thing is to keep the government's budget in balance, or a small surplus over the cycle. Now, what I mean by that is you want to have the ability to borrow a ton of money and spend it when you get a recession or an adverse shock like COVID. But you've also got to be able to bank surpluses when times are good. Now, if you can run your budget at more or less break even or a small surplus, so you're not borrowing additional dollars every year, over time your debt becomes a smaller percentage of the economy. So you don't, there's a lot of people in politics, including, frankly, some Liberals, had a very unrealistic attitude to debt. I mean, like Peter Costello, great treasurer, etc., but Peter was always going on and on about having to pay off debt, and though debt was a bad thing. And I used to say to him occasionally, look, there isn't a business in Australia that hasn't been built on debt. There isn't, most people's, fortunes, such as they are, have been enabled by debt. So going around saying debt is bad is a little bit counterintuitive. It's the question is, what are you borrowing the money for? There's a difference between borrowing money to buy an asset or build a business and borrowing the money to, put it on the races or, spend it all, in lavish entertainment. So, so if you have, X billion dollars of debt today, and it's 20% of GDP, well, when GDP is double that, and that amount of money will only be 10% of GDP. So essentially, as long as you can grow the economy faster than expenditure, you'll get yourself into balance, which is what our strategy was when I was PM, and we were well on the way to getting there. There was no question about that. And then of course COVID came. Yeah, so I think that's the debt won't be forgiven, but like there's never been a cheaper time for governments to borrow at the moment. And I mean, if ever there's a time to be putting money into productive economic infrastructure, it's now. But that doesn't mean blowing it, by the way. But you've got to. But your cost of capital is now so low. This is, subject to a whole lot of other provisos, this is definitely the time to get on with it, which is one of the reasons why I took over Snowy Hydro from the States and got on with Snowy 2.0, why the Commonwealth is building the Western Sydney Airport and other things like that. And, they will all be, Snowy's, it was interesting, when we bought Snowy out, bought New South Wales and Victoria out, I felt we were paying a higher price than I would have paid if I was spending my own money. I thought it was a fair price, but I just sort of thought, it just seems a little bit on the higher side. But we thought, well, it's going from one government's pocket to another. They're just going to spend it on infrastructure. They probably would have got us to give them the money for anyway, so it didn't matter. Having said that, that has turned out to be a very, very good, very, very good deal for the Commonwealth. So that's a good example of the kind of thing you should be spending money on at this time when debt is so cheap.
One last question. Bill?
Malcolm.
Yes, sir.
The telecommunications industry.
Yeah.
I've got involved recently with looking at EMR and some electro-hypersensitivity with people. I've discovered stories that have been sort of pushed down, and it looks like the industry's seriously not putting the health of people forward. I've instructed a local kindergarten 25 metres from a tower to speak to their local member, Julian Lesser, and he told them, I'm not interested in talking with you.
Really? Well, that's terrible. You should tell Julian Lesser that that's his job, to talk to
I told
people.
him directly.
That is
Unlike him.
absolutely wrong. His job is to talk to everyone.
So this has been 3 months now.
Yeah.
You've been the telecommunications minister.
Yeah.
You probably know more about this. I've read Wyatt Brown Land.
Mm.
I'm planning to meet with Paul Fletcher. Did you fix the telecommunications industry?
Oh, no. I
Or
mean,
did you wreck it?
there's a sort of a...
To touch this.
No. You're talking about, this is the, impact on humans from radiation from, wireless towers and so forth. Look, the people that talk to, if you want to actually find out what the science is, what the evidence is, the people to talk to are an agency called ARPANSA. Have you? Yeah, well, I've always found them very good. They may not necessarily confirm what you want them to say. I'd make a couple of very, very high-level observations. I'm not even remotely an expert in this area, and I mean, generally my reputation for tech savviness is overblown, and it's because, at least when I got into Parliament, most MPs didn't know how to turn on their phones, So it's relative. That's changing now because there are younger people there. But anyway, the frequency that are being deployed and the power of the transmitters, the frequency is one thing, but power is much less than it used to be, right? So we're moving into an environment where you have more transmitters, particularly with 5G, more antenna, I suppose is the best way to describe it, but at much lower power. So that is one thing in terms of impact. The other thing, of course, is that we're all running around with these things, which are obviously radio devices, and I mean, as an MP, and I got very involved with this, right? So nobody when I was a member of Parliament ever said Malcolm Turnbull said he wouldn't speak to me. That was my mission, was always to connect, and Susan remembers that. So, but let's.
Talk was the same.
Look, it's just, I mean, if you are misanthropic, you shouldn't be in Parliament. Okay, it's a people business. It's like someone who hates talking to people buying a pub. Truthfully, politics is about people, and you've got to actually enjoy chatting to people to do it. But I guess I just make this point. You get the classic sort of thing I would get was on one line you'd have people saying, say from Bronte particularly, where there used to be some, they'd say, the mobile phone reception is terrible, you know, right, what are you going to do about it? I'd just say, hang on, that's great, just hang on, just let me take this other call. You can't put up a mobile phone tower in Bronte, you know. and so you get it, you know, you do get this contest, and you know, there's obviously got to be a balance, but I think I would really encourage you to connect with Panza, and I found them very, very good. Having said that, they are scientists. They are, you know, their geekiness is off the charts. So are they good at explaining things? I mean, one of my colleagues got some people from Panza to speak at a public meeting, and he said,
Oh dear.
he said literally nobody understood what they were saying. So that's an issue. But anyway, I hope Julian sees you, and he should see you. I might give him a little tickle up.
Yeah.
Just a little gentle suggestion.
I think we've got one more question. Last question over here.
In conclusion, thank
Yes,
you.
sir.
Thank you, Mr. Turnbull. Would you please tell us, if you're PM still,
Yeah.
what are the issues that you would be worrying about today,
Mm.
and
Question.
what are the things that you'd be looking forward to in the next couple of years?
Well, I mean, I think they're all, you know, they're all they're big perennial challenges, right? You know, in foreign affairs, obviously, you know, the shifts in power in the region, you know, China's, you know, more aggressive, assertive foreign policy, the pressure they're putting on Australia at the moment, which we obviously resist. That's, you know, a big issue. Global warming, you know, I mean, what are we going to do about that? I mean, how thankfully, we have a new administration in America that's taking a real lead on that. So I assume, you know, the coalition will be dragged along, kicking and screaming. But, you know, it is, I mean, to give you an idea of the sort of craziness on that front. So, you know, there's a by-election in the Upper Hunter at the moment, which basically is from Singleton, you know, up to, you know, I guess up to not quite Tamworth. But anyway, you know, there's a lot of open cut coal mining in the Hunter. It's very, you know, it's obviously done enormous damage to the landscape. Most of the mines are operating below capacity. Export demand is falling for all the obvious reasons. But the view of both the National Party and Labor Party and shooters and One Nation is there should be absolutely no restriction on the continued expansion of coal mining, which is only going to have this consequence, and there's no plan for the future. So it'll only have this consequence, is that people with existing mining jobs will see them even more threatened than they are already. The landscape will be even more devastated, and when the coal story does come to an end, as it will and it must, there won't be new jobs. So, you know, the problem that you've got is that you've got literally a denial of reality. The Labor candidate apparently said in a careless moment, well, coal will decline over time, which is only a statement of the obvious, and the Nationals are flaying him for that. Now, that is so irresponsible and so crazy, but that's, you know, that's where you've got to, that's obviously, that's a rock my leadership founded on several times. So, but this sort of denial of the reality of global warming is a very, very big issue, and you know, it's an issue globally, and an issue here as well. So that's something that's, I guess, an unfinished issue to resolve.
Things you're looking forward to?
Oh, look, I think we've got great advantages. I mean, you know, we do have the ability, just on energy, to go to a zero emission energy sector, particularly electricity, and have cheaper electricity. You know, we've got extraordinary solar resource, wind resource. You know, we can do it much more easily than anywhere in Europe, for example. So I think we've got the opportunity to be a low-cost, clean energy superpower. you know, Ross Garnaut said that, and he's right. That's not, you know, BS. That's fair. I think we also have our best asset, as I said earlier, is our diverse community. You know, Australia has got a connection with every culture, every country in the world, and we've got to maintain and support that. I mean, when I was at Goldman, the firm used to hire more Australians than they could ever use in Australia, and a number of the other big global banks did the same. And I was talking to, actually, as a fellow that was in charge of it at JP Morgan, I said, why do you do that? And he said, well, we've just found that Australians are fantastic global citizens because they grow up in a multicultural society. They're used to dealing with people from every background. And so you take a Australian and you plonk him or her, you know, in Europe, in Asia, and, you know, anywhere in the world, South America, whatever, and they're not going to go, oh my God, there are all these people that don't look like me or sound like me. I say, oh well, this is not entirely unfamiliar, and I think that's so this, you know, this our diversity and our multiculturalism is a gigantic asset. We, you know, and that's one of the things we can't be complacent about.